Most people think dying to self means sacrificing what you love or becoming invisible in the world. But Joel Goldsmith revealed something far more profound and liberating. This ancient mystical secret isn't about losing yourself. It's about discovering who you truly are beneath the false identity you've been defending your entire life. The self that must die isn't your authentic being. It's the collection of fears, resentments, accumulated wounds, and protective masks you've built over decades. It's the voice that constantly judges, compares, worries, and struggles. This false self has convinced you it's protecting you, but it's actually your prison. When Jesus spoke of losing your life to find it, he wasn't teaching self-negation. He was pointing to the most revolutionary act of consciousness possible. He was revealing that beneath your constructed identity lives an imperishable divine presence. That presence has been waiting patiently for you to stop defending the illusion. The transformation begins the moment you stop fighting for the small self's survival. Not through force or willpower, but through gentle recognition. You begin to see that everything you've been protecting never needed protection. Everything you've been building was built on sand. Joel Goldsmith spent years discovering what the mystics of every tradition knew. The personal sense of self, the one that takes everything personally, that feels separate and vulnerable, isn't your true identity. It's a thought structure you've mistaken for reality, and that mistake costs you everything. This false self operates from one primary emotion: fear. Fear of not having enough, not being enough, not mattering enough. It drives you to accumulate, defend, prove, and protect. Every anxiety, every resentment, every moment of stress comes from this imaginary self trying to survive in an imaginary battle. What makes this teaching so powerful is its immediacy. You don't need years of practice to begin. You can start noticing right now how this false self operates. Watch how it reacts when criticized. Notice how it craves recognition. Observe how it creates stories about past hurts and future threats. The watching itself begins the dying process. Not a violent death, but a gentle dissolution. Like morning mist disappearing in sunlight. The false self can't survive conscious observation because it only exists in unconsciousness. It thrives in the darkness of automatic reaction. Here's what actually happens when you understand dying to self. You stop taking your thoughts as absolute truth. That voice in your head that narrates everything, judges everything, fears everything. You recognize it as just noise. Not you, not reality. Just conditioned mental patterns running on autopilot. This recognition creates immediate space. Space between stimulus and response. Space between thought and belief. Space between circumstance and suffering. In that space, something extraordinary emerges. A quiet awareness that was always there, hidden beneath the mental noise. This awareness doesn't judge or fear. It simply observes with compassionate neutrality. It sees your body, your thoughts, your emotions, but isn't imprisoned by them. This is your true self, the consciousness that Joel Goldsmith called Christ consciousness. Not religious mythology, but direct experience of your divine nature. When you stop defending the false self, you discover you were never separate from God. The separation was just a thought pattern, a learned belief, a case of mistaken identity. Your true self has always been one with infinite intelligence, infinite love, infinite supply. The practical implications transform everything. When the false self dies, so does its endless neediness. You stop requiring external validation because you're no longer identified with the self that craved it. You stop fearing loss because you realize you never possessed anything. You are the presence in which all experience appears. Relationships shift dramatically. Without the false self's constant demands, you can finally love without agenda. You can give without depleting yourself. You can receive without guilt. The transactional nature of human connection dissolves into something genuine. Your work changes too. No longer driven by fear or ego, you work from inspiration and service. Success and failure lose their grip on you, not because you stop caring, but because your identity isn't tied to outcomes. You do excellent work for its own sake, not to prove your worth. Even physical healing becomes possible. Joel Goldsmith documented countless cases where disease disappeared when people stopped identifying with the body-mind as their total self. When you know yourself as consciousness itself, The body responds to that higher knowing. This isn't magical thinking. It's the natural result of shifting your identity from the temporary to the eternal. Emily had defended her resentment for 17 years. Her sister had betrayed her trust in a family business dispute, and Emily built an entire identity around being the wounded party. She wore her justified anger like armor, rehearsing the story to anyone who'd listen. The false self thrived on this narrative. When Emily encountered Joel Goldsmith's teachings on dying to self, she initially resisted. Letting go of her resentment felt like betraying herself, like saying what happened didn't matter. But gradually she began to see something shocking. The resentment wasn't protecting her, it was consuming her. She started practicing what Goldsmith taught, simply observing her thoughts without believing them. When the familiar story arose, "Emily, your sister wronged you." She didn't argue with it or suppress it. She just watched it like clouds passing. Something shifted. The story lost its power. Within 3 months, Emily experienced something she never imagined possible. The resentment simply wasn't there anymore. Not because she forgave through effort, but because the self who needed to resent had died. She could think of her sister with complete neutrality, even compassion. The energy she'd spent maintaining that grievance returned to her as vitality and peace. Christopher spent 30 years climbing corporate ladders, driven by a desperate need to prove his worth. His father's dismissive words from childhood, "You'll never amount to anything," had created a false self entirely built on achievement and recognition. Every promotion felt empty within days. At 52, facing another meaningless promotion, Christopher had a crisis. He discovered Goldsmith's writings on the illusory self. For the first time, he questioned whether the driven achiever was really him. He began the practice of dying to self, not by quitting his job, but by watching his compulsive patterns. The change took 6 months of daily observation. Christopher noticed how his self-worth rose and fell with others' opinions. He saw how he manufactured crises to feel important. He recognized the exhausting performance he'd been maintaining. The false self's game became visible. What emerged was unexpected. Christopher's work actually improved, but from a completely different source. Instead of desperate proving, he worked from genuine interest and skill. His colleagues noticed the difference. He seemed more present, more creative, less defensive. But more importantly, Christopher felt free for the first time since childhood. The inner critic his father had planted finally died. Rebecca struggled with anxiety for 23 years. Every day brought new worries, imagined catastrophes, worst-case scenarios playing on repeat. She'd tried everything: therapy, medication, meditation apps. Nothing touched the core issue. The anxious self had become her primary identity. When Rebecca read Joel Goldsmith's explanation of the false self, something clicked. Her anxiety wasn't a chemical imbalance or personality flaw. It was the natural state of a self that believed it was separate and vulnerable. The false self's job was to scan for threats because it lived in perpetual danger. She began the practice of dying to self during her anxiety attacks. Instead of fighting the fear or believing its stories, she observed it with curious detachment. This is what false self-fear feels like. The anxiety would spike at first, then something remarkable happened. It would pass through her without hooking her identity. After 4 months, Rebecca's baseline state had shifted. The anxiety still arose sometimes, but it no longer defined her. She could feel fear without becoming the fearful one. The self that was threatened by life had died, and what remained was a presence that could hold all experience without being destroyed by it. Her therapist was amazed at the transformation. Amanda lived with chronic pain for 9 years after a car accident. Doctors found no physical cause, but the pain was absolutely real. She'd become the pain patient, her entire life organized around managing discomfort. The false self had merged completely with the body's sensations. Goldsmith's teaching on dying to self reached Amanda through a friend. At first she felt insulted. The pain wasn't imaginary or psychological, but something in his words about false identity intrigued her. What if she wasn't the body in pain? What if she was the consciousness observing the pain? She started practicing what felt impossible, observing the pain without identifying as the one in pain. This is a sensation in the body, not who I am. The distinction seemed subtle, but created profound shifts. The pain didn't disappear immediately, but her relationship to it transformed completely. Over 8 months, something miraculous unfolded. As Amanda's identity shifted from body to consciousness, the pain gradually diminished, not through fighting it, but through no longer giving it her identity. Her doctors called it spontaneous remission. Amanda knew it was the death of the self who needed the pain to feel real. The body responded to her new knowing. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the primary practice of observing without identifying, Joel Goldsmith offered complementary techniques. One of the most powerful is what he called impersonalization. When someone criticizes you or treats you poorly, the false self takes it personally. It creates a story about being wronged, disrespected, or attacked. Impersonalization means recognizing that their behavior has nothing to do with you. They're operating from their own false self, their own pain, their own unconscious patterns. When you stop taking it personally, you stop feeding the false self's favorite meal, victimhood, and righteous indignation. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or having no boundaries. It means responding from consciousness rather than reacting from wounded ego. You can set firm limits without the emotional charge of personal offense. You can walk away from toxicity without carrying resentment. The practice is simple but requires vigilance. Every time you feel personally attacked, pause. Ask yourself, is this really about me, or am I watching someone else's pain express itself? The question alone creates space. In that space, the false self loses its grip. Another essential technique is what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence. The false self lives entirely in past and future, rehashing old wounds or imagining future threats. It can't survive in the present moment because the present moment contains no problems, only what is. Whenever you notice yourself lost in thought, particularly stressful thought, bring your attention fully to now. Not as a mental exercise, but as direct sensory awareness. Feel your breath. Notice sounds. Observe physical sensations. This isn't meditation, it's returning to reality. The false self will immediately protest. It will insist you need to think about these problems, plan for these threats, remember these grievances. It will make now seem insufficient or dangerous. This resistance is actually the false self fighting for survival. Stay with the present anyway. What you discover is profound. Right now, in this moment, you're okay. The disasters are imagined, the threats are thoughts, the wounds are memories. Reality, this actual moment, is simply what's happening. And what's happening is always manageable when you're not adding the false self's interpretations. Joel Goldsmith also taught the practice of gratitude, but not the shallow kind. Not listing blessings while your false self secretly feels entitled or fearful. True gratitude emerges when you recognize you never deserved anything, and yet here you are, conscious, alive, experiencing this mystery. This recognition dissolves the false self's core assumption that life owes you something. When you realize existence itself is pure grace, unearned and undeserved, a deep humility arises, not groveling or self-deprecation, but wonder at the gift of being. From this place, you stop demanding that life look a certain way. You stop resenting what you don't have. You stop feeling cheated by circumstances. The false self can't maintain its grievances when you see everything as bonus. Practice this daily. Before sleep, acknowledge one thing you didn't earn but received anyway. Your breath. Your heartbeat. The intelligence that digests your food without your conscious control. This practice doesn't deny pain or struggle. It contextualizes them within the larger miracle of existence itself. The final complementary practice is silence. Not just external quiet, but inner stillness. The false self is made of noise, the constant mental chatter that narrates, judges, and projects. In silence, that chatter becomes visible. You realize you're not the voice, you're the space in which it appears. Joel Goldsmith recommended daily periods of deliberate silence. Not meditation with technique or goals, just sitting in awareness without agenda. The false self will create urgency, boredom, restlessness. Let it. Just sit. Just be. Just watch. What emerges from consistent practice of silence is your true nature. It's been there all along, hidden beneath the noise. It's the quiet knowing that predates thought. It's the consciousness that exists before you add interpretations. It's what you are when you stop trying to be anything. This silence isn't empty or void. It's full of presence, alive with awareness. From this silence, appropriate action arises naturally. You speak when speaking serves. You move when movement is called for. But it all comes from stillness, not from the false self's anxious striving. The path of dying to self isn't smooth. Your false self won't dissolve quietly. It's been running your life for decades, and it will fight fiercely for survival. Understanding these obstacles helps you navigate them without getting discouraged or giving up. The first major challenge is the fear of annihilation. When you start withdrawing identification from thoughts and emotions, the false self panics. It creates terrifying thoughts. If I'm not this self, who am I? What will happen to me? You might feel like you're going crazy or losing your grip on reality. This fear is actually a good sign. It means the practice is working. The false self only fears its own death. Your true self, consciousness itself, can't die. It has no birth and no death. It simply is. When the fear arises, recognize it as the false self's last defense. The key is moving through the fear rather than retreating from it. Keep observing. Keep practicing presence. The fear will peak and then subside. What you discover on the other side is that you didn't disappear. You became more real, more present, more alive than ever before. The second obstacle is what Goldsmith called taking on the world's beliefs. Even as you die to your personal false self, you can still carry collective false beliefs. The belief that you're vulnerable to disease. The belief that you're subject to economic forces. The belief that aging means deterioration. These mass beliefs are more subtle because everyone around you confirms them. They seem like objective reality rather than agreed-upon illusions. Your family, doctors, news media, and culture constantly reinforce these limitations. Dying to self includes dying to these collective falsehoods. The practice here is questioning everything you've accepted as inevitable. Do you know from direct experience that your body must decline with age, or is that a belief? Do you know that financial security depends on external conditions, or is that a thought you've never examined? This doesn't mean denying practical reality. It means recognizing the difference between what is and what you've been told must be. Many of the limitations you experience aren't real. They're the result of accepting collective false beliefs as your personal truth. The third challenge is the seduction of spiritual ego. As you make progress dying to self, a new false self can emerge. The spiritual person who's more awakened than others, the one who's transcended ego while everyone else is still trapped. This is just the false self in disguise. Joel Goldsmith warned against this trap repeatedly. True dying to self includes dying to the self who's proud of dying to self. The moment you think you've arrived, you've recreated separation. The moment you judge others as less conscious, you've rebuilt the false self. The antidote is humility and humor. When you catch yourself feeling spiritually superior, laugh. That's just the ego trying to survive by wearing spiritual clothing. Real transformation makes you more human, not more special. More connected, not more separate. Notice also the tendency to make dying to self into another achievement project. The false self loves projects because projects require a self to complete them. This teaching isn't about becoming better or more enlightened. It's about recognizing what you already are beneath the illusion. The fourth obstacle is the plateau period. After initial breakthroughs, you might experience weeks or months where nothing seems to change. The insights that felt revolutionary become familiar. The practice feels routine. The false self seems as strong as ever. This plateau isn't failure, it's integration. The dramatic shifts happen in layers. After each breakthrough, there's a period where your entire system adjusts to the new level of consciousness. The false self regroups and reveals deeper layers of conditioning. During plateaus, consistency matters more than intensity. Keep practicing even when it feels mechanical. Keep observing even when nothing dramatic happens. The work is happening beneath conscious awareness. Your nervous system is rewiring. Your energy field is reorganizing. Trust the process Goldsmith described. Dying to self isn't linear. It's rhythmic, like breathing. There are times of expansion and times of consolidation. Both are necessary. The plateau periods test your commitment. Are you practicing for dramatic experiences? Or are you genuinely committed to truth regardless of how it feels? If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Once you've navigated the initial obstacles, dying to self becomes integrated into daily life. You're no longer practicing a technique. You're living from a different center. This advanced stage brings subtle refinements and deeper recognitions. In relationships, you discover a new possibility. You can be fully intimate without losing yourself. The false self either merged with others, losing boundaries, or defended against them, maintaining separation. True self can connect deeply while remaining distinct. Your partner's mood doesn't determine yours. Their opinions don't threaten you. Their needs don't deplete you. Not because you're detached or uncaring, but because you're no longer looking to them to complete or validate the false self. You love from fullness rather than neediness. This creates relationships of extraordinary depth. Without the false self's agendas and defenses, you can actually see the other person. Not your projection of them, not your needs from them, but who they truly are. This quality of attention is the greatest gift you can offer. In your work life, advanced dying to self transforms your relationship with success and failure. You bring full excellence to your tasks, but outcomes no longer define you. A project succeeds? Wonderful. It fails? Also fine. Your identity remains untouched. This doesn't create laziness or mediocrity. Actually, the opposite occurs. Without the false self's fear of failure or attachment to success, you work with greater creativity and freedom. You take appropriate risks. You learn from mistakes without shame. You celebrate victories without inflation. Your career becomes an expression rather than a validation. You're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. You work because consciousness wants to express through these particular talents and interests. The work itself becomes the reward. Financial concerns lose their grip too. Not because money doesn't matter, but because your security doesn't depend on it. You manage finances responsibly, but without the anxiety of the false self that believes money determines worth or safety. Health takes on new dimensions at this advanced stage. You relate to your body as a temporary vehicle for consciousness rather than your total identity. Physical sensations arise: pain, pleasure, hunger, fatigue, but they don't define your state of being. This shift often produces measurable health improvements. When you stop identifying as the body relaxes its defensive postures. Chronic tensions release. Immune function optimizes. Even serious conditions can shift when consciousness is no longer contracted around bodily identification. You still care for the body responsibly. You eat well, exercise, rest, seek medical care when appropriate, but from a different motivation. Not fear of death or disease, but appreciation for the gift of embodiment. You're a good steward of this temporary form. When illness or aging occurs, you experience it without the added suffering of resistance. Pain happens, but without the story that you're a victim of your body. Limitation appears, but without the belief that you're diminished as consciousness. The body changes, but you remain unchanged. Perhaps the most profound advanced integration is your relationship with death itself. The false self's primary terror has always been annihilation. Every fear ultimately traces back to the fear of ceasing to exist. When that self dies, so does death as ultimate threat. You recognize directly that consciousness itself doesn't die. Bodies die. Thoughts die. Emotions die. Identities die. But the awareness in which all these appear and disappear is untouched by their coming and going. You are that awareness, not the temporary contents. This isn't belief or hope. It's direct knowing. You've already experienced the death of the false self multiple times. Each time you discovered that you didn't disappear. You became more present. The same will be true of physical death. Living from this recognition, you're finally free to fully engage life. Without death fear driving unconscious choices, you can take appropriate risks, love deeply, speak truth, follow inspiration, create freely. The false self's caution no longer constrains you. You live from consciousness that knows itself as eternal. The total transformation Joel Goldsmith described isn't becoming someone different. It's recognizing what you've always been beneath the false identity. You're not creating a new self, you're discovering the true self that preceded all constructed selves. This recognition brings a freedom that's hard to describe to those still identified with the false self. It's not freedom from responsibility or circumstances. It's freedom within all conditions. Nothing that happens can threaten who you truly are because you're no longer identified with the threatened self. Problems still arise. Challenges still appear. Losses still occur. But they happen within a context of fundamental okayness. The drama continues, but you're no longer trapped in it. You're the space in which the drama appears, not a character fighting for survival. People notice something different about you, though they might not be able to name it. You're more present, more peaceful, more authentic, less defended, less reactive, less needy. They feel safe around you because you're not using them to maintain a false identity. Your impact in the world amplifies naturally. Not because you're trying to make an impact, but because consciousness flowing through you touches others. The false self's actions, even good ones, carry the frequency of separation and need. True self's actions carry the frequency of wholeness. You become a healing presence without trying to heal anyone. Your peace invites others into peace. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. Your freedom shows others that freedom is possible, not through preaching or teaching, but through being. This is what Jesus meant by being the light of the world. Not trying to enlighten others, but being so identified with the light of consciousness that it naturally radiates. Joel Goldsmith called this the ministry of silence. Your very presence does the work. Paradoxically, you also become less concerned with impact. You act from inner direction rather than external validation. Whether your actions reach thousands, or touch one person, or remain completely invisible, it's all the same. You're not building a legacy for a false self that no longer exists. The new perspective transforms everything you thought you knew about spirituality. You realize that every practice, every teaching, every tradition was pointing to this simple recognition. Die to the false self. Awaken as consciousness. Live from that knowing. Christianity's crucifixion and resurrection suddenly makes sense. The cross represents dying to self. The resurrection represents awakening to your true immortal nature. Every mystical tradition uses different language for the same essential teaching. You stop seeking because you realize there's nowhere to go. You are already what you've been seeking. The false self created the sense of something missing, something to achieve, somewhere to arrive. Without that self, you're complete right now. This doesn't end growth or learning, but it comes from curiosity rather than lack. You explore consciousness not to fix yourself, but because exploration is what consciousness does. You develop capacities not to become worthy, but because development is intrinsically interesting. Living as consciousness rather than false self, you finally understand what Joel Goldsmith meant by the secret of secrets. It was never secret because it was hidden. It was secret because it's so obvious we overlook it. You are already the presence you've been seeking. The search is over. Not because you achieved something, but because you recognized that the searcher was the obstacle. What remains is just this, pure awareness experiencing itself through infinite forms. And that awareness is what you are, what you've always been, what you'll always be. Your life becomes an expression of this recognition, sometimes dramatic, sometimes quiet. Sometimes successful by worldly standards, sometimes not. It doesn't matter. The false self who needed life to look a certain way has died. What remains is consciousness joyfully experiencing whatever arises. This is the ultimate freedom Joel Goldsmith offered. Not freedom from life's challenges, but freedom to meet them as consciousness itself. You are no longer the vulnerable separate self trying to survive. You are the eternal presence in which all experience arises. Nothing can threaten you. Nothing is missing. You are complete. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video. Subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.